We've been talking about having me out to the UK to speak a couple of years ago, I guess it was, and I told my wife that, and she was totally in favor of that idea. But it was just, I mean, there's so much going on around the farm. Bees are set up for winter right now. We have everything fed up. All the mites are in check. And we're probably, now that this cold weather is drifting in, I think we're going to start, drifting into the next stage is where we start bringing our hives indoors to endure this winter of ours. So we're kind of just stuck in a little bit of a lull. I have Carrie going around right now doing some oxalic acid treatments starting today. And we'll hopefully get through that for the next 3 or 4 days, and then things will be ready to bring in for winter. So things are coming along quite nicely. Okay, so anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Ian Steppler, and I just want to, for those that don't recognize me, you probably recognize this. This is how most of you see me in my videos, on my YouTube videos, holding a camera up in front of my face. So if you didn't recognize me before, you should recognize me now.
There was no coffee though.
Oh, coffee's right in front of me. I'm from Miami, Manitoba. I'm married to Sandy. We're a family of 5. I have my diploma in agriculture, and that's actually where I got my beginning to the beekeeping business. I'm a first-generation beekeeper. I've been beekeeping for 20 years now. I'm a director in the Manitoba Beekeepers Association, vice president, and I chair a research committee and a bunch of other things. So I'm very busy with association business. I'm owner, manager, president of Steppler Farms, and I'm specifically the farm's apiarist. So here's Canada, and I'm in Manitoba, and our farm is located right down just above North Dakota. We're about 20 miles off the border. So we're right dab in the middle of Canada. We're located near a little prairie community called Miami, about 300 or 400 people. I guess you can call it a hamlet. And Miami is located on, this is Lake Bottom. Right in this area used to be where ancient Lake Agassiz used to sit. So this is lake land, flat land bottom. Our farm is just on the escarpment on the edge of that ancient lake. So we're up in the hills, and here's a picture of me and my combine right now, and I'm looking down the escarpment. So I'm looking down the escarpment, and Miami is just about in their horizon there. Miami is just on the shore of ancient Lake Agassiz. So our farm is very variable with its land and its makeup. We're primarily up in the hills, so we have very rolling hills topography as we farm the lands down the escarpment and down to Miami to the flats. So our land is made up with a huge demographic of land types and conditions. We're a grain farmer, a 3,300 acre grain farm. We farm wheat, canola, corn, soybeans, silage, feed grains. We grow all of our feed grains. And because of the land type that I was showing you, we employ all types of conservation practices to try to manage these conditions. We are cattle farmers, primary cattle farmers. We have 650 head of purebred Charolais cattle, and we've been in the Charolais business for 50 years now, nearly 50 years. We sell stock right across Canada into the States. We sell our stock through a bull sale, which we hold in March. And we sell our select females through a piece of program sale coming up in December here. So we're very involved in the cattle industry. So I'm the beekeeper of the farm, and we manage 1,500 hives. Primarily, we're honey producers. Okay, we have a lot of pollination opportunities, so we focus on this huge canola crop that's grown across the western prairies. We will pull in 250 to 300,000 pounds of honey annually. And to do that, I hire up to 7 local employees to help get that workload done. Typically, it's school kids. Once they get out of school, they help me for a month and a half to throw some boxes around. I sell my honey into a cooperative, which packs honey underneath the name Bee Made Honey. So what I want to do with you today is I want to kind of bring my management perspective to you guys. And the way I want to do that is I kind of want to step myself through the year of my honey farm. And that way I can kind of, you know, talk about all these conditions and all these dynamics that are going on, which directly reflect the management practices I put towards my honey farm. There's a lot about beekeeping. You hear a lot about beekeeping's regional, beekeeping's local, and that's absolutely correct. But all the basics are the same. We are looking after the same bees, and we are all targeting those certain conditions, all the conditions that help us manage our bees. And if we can look maybe outside of what we're doing, just kind of broaden our perspective and maybe see what I'm doing or I'm seeing what you're doing, we're all targeting those same conditions to try to achieve those same things within our hives. So the way we do it's a lot different, but by seeing how other people, you know, target those conditions to achieve it helps us understand our bees a little bit better. So that's just kind of perspective I want to bring to you guys today. So as I was mentioning, we're just about ready to bring our hives inside. I winter all my hives indoors. So, you know, we gather them up with the easy loader, put them on the truck, forklift them in, and we stack them in rows inside this insulated, it's my hot room. It doubles as my hot room. So it's a 45 by 50 space, which I bring all my hives in, turn off the lights, and I keep them within their boxes. Then I provide a little bit of air ventilation through the shed just to remove that tremendous amount of heat within the building and circulate the air to keep you know, the air from layering. So as spring approaches, these bees start to get active. You appreciate they've been, we're going to move them in now, and they're going to be inside in confinement, stuck within their box until April. So they can't get out of their hives for about 5 months. Each one of these hives will kick off roughly 15 to 20 to 25 kilowatts of heat energy. Okay, so it's a tremendous, they're like little heaters within this room. And what we need to do is be able to take that heat and pull it out to keep the room cool. We keep it at 4 degrees Celsius. As spring approaches, we have trouble keeping the temperature in that room down because the outdoor temperature is starting to increase, so we can't remove as much heat within the building. And these bees start to warm the building and they start to get active. And when they get active, you know, as you can see in the picture here, they start to beard and they just want out. And it's getting to the end of winter. They've been in confinement for 5.5 months, and they want out. So they start telling you they want out, kind of like your kids when they're stuck inside the house all winter, and that first smell of spring spirit comes through, and they want outside, and they're playing outside. Everybody wants to get outside, and it's the same with the bees. They'll tell you when they want outside. So once we start seeing them get active in the spring here, once we notice that winter's probably passed and there's some nice weather ahead for the bees to fly, we start moving our hives outside. Everything's done in the use of forklifts and pallets. There's no individual lifting of hives and such. Everything's mechanicalized. I have an easy loader with an arm to set them out. And generally I set the hives out at night. And one of the reasons is because when you open up the door, when they've been stuck inside for 5.5 months, they see that sunshine and it's warm inside that building, they fly. So you open that door and all of a sudden that whole wintering chamber becomes a big, you know, mess of flying bees. So we move them out at night. If we can't keep the temperature down in the shed to hold them in their boxes, we move them out at night just to be able to get them out into their yards, set them down, let them settle in for that first sight of sun the next morning so they can get up and fly. The other reason why I move out at night is because generally at this time, the frost starts coming out of the ground and I start getting stuck, and I hate getting stuck, especially bees on load. So what we like to do is wait for nighttime temperature to kind of firm the ground up so then I can access these yards. So once we get them outside, these hives get opportunity to fly. And as we all know, bees don't defecate unless they fly, right? So they have to actively fly to be able to poop. And these hives have been confined for 5.5 months, so they're ready. They're full, you know, they're ready to take that first flight, and they'll go fly and they'll relieve themselves. We have to leave them alone for a couple days just to let them relieve themselves, because there's so much bee poop flying everywhere. It's just, we can't work through that. So we set them down into their yards. We kind of leave them alone for a couple days and just let things get cleaned up and let them get settled back into their boxes. And then we proceed with our work afterwards. If you're ever in Canada, and if you ever get the opportunity to visit a beekeeper who is just moving their hives out in the spring, make for damn sure you come by and witness this spectacle, because it's one of my favorite times of the year, when all the bees are in the air, they're all flying, and then they all settle back down to their boxes. One of those points in time which I really appreciate and I look forward to. This graph shows absolutely everything that goes on within your hive, and it helps me connect what's going on within that hive to all those dynamics that are going on. This is a graph that is created by a fellow back in Manitoba here with the name of Lloyd Harris. And what he actually did is he conducted a study back in the 70s where he went and he painted every single one of the bees in his hive. And every 10 days he painted them, and every 10 days he'd come back and paint them, but he'd count every single one of the bees within his colony. And he did this through the entire year, all the way through winter. And what it gave him, this huge data set, was enabled him to determine the lifespan of the bees throughout the year, and then with that make predictions of the lifespan and just kind of display all these dynamics. This graph is Randy Oliver, who's from California in the United States. He took all that huge data set and he translated it into a graph like this. He does what Randy Oliver does, is he takes a whole bunch of information and puts it into something that we can all make sense of. And this is the graph he put together. So I'll just kind of walk your way through it, because I'm going to be referring back to it quite often. You can see here's the brood line all the way through the year. This is the population of the bees throughout the year. And you can see the color code represents the age of the bees throughout the entire year. So you'll notice that through summer, and as fall approaches, right about where we are, that the hives set up their winter nest, right? And you'll notice that when they set their winter nest up, the nest pretty much stays static, pretty much stays the same size throughout the winter. You'll notice the brood is pretty much ended. You'll notice a little bit of brooding going on in the late winter. And then you'll notice these bees getting old, very old, up to about 200 days. This arrow here represents when I'm moving my hives out in the spring, okay? So this is, mid-March, about that period when we typically leave winter, we're proceeding into spring. We set our hives out right about this time of year. At this time on the farm, we want to get that queen energized. We want to get her brooding. We want to get those eggs starting to get laid. We want those bees to, capture that spirit of developing out the larvae. So we start feeding supplement. This is dry supplement we set out. This is before the pollen is available. So they're out there, get access to that dry protein source. We also feed patties. I'm a big believer in supplemental feeding. So we're feeding patties on the colonies. We go around, we drop protein down to all these bees. I make my own supplement. And we're also we're flashing them syrup, little bits of syrup all the time, just little bits, just to kind of represent, just kind of mimic a natural flow. And that incoming feed source energizes that queen, and that gets her laying right away. We're also conducting a lot of assessments. And as I talk here, you'll notice that I do a lot of assessments. And the way I do that is I tip my colonies back and I frame score. So as we're going back, we're emergency feeding, do that, you heft the hive. So we lift the hive. If it's heavy, it's fine. If it's light, we give them feed. But as we're doing that, we're also tipping them back and we're scoring every one of our colonies. So the strong ones, we score strong with a blue drink tag. At the socials, you buy these tags, buy drinks or whatever. So we tack the front of the strong ones with a blue tag, represents 8 to 10 frame colony. The mediums, which are the 4 to 6 frames, we'll mark with a gray tag or whatever. In the weeks that need attention, we mark the red as caution. So we always assess our colonies from underneath, as a rule. You crack your lid open and the bees come up and cover the top bars, they lie to you how, how big that colony actually is, unless you actually get down into them. If you tip your colony back and you look underneath, you can tell exactly the size of that cluster, because they can't lie to you underneath. They have to maintain all those cluster dynamics at all times. So they're stretching to be able to cover that nest that they're developing, right? So you look at this colony we tip back here, and I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4 frames of bees. So I'd score that as a medium. So that cluster is represented just as it shows. If I look on the top, they could cover 6 frames, 8 frames. And I mean, that kind of assessment doesn't do me any good. I have to know exactly the size of these clusters without getting down into them, because I have 1,500 hives to go through. I don't have time to open every one of these colonies up. So this just helps me determine the size and what I got going on there. At the same time, we're also calling out all the weak and the dead, anything like this frame of bees we shake in the grass. We're monitoring for disease. I'm not going to speak a lot about disease control here. I'm going to talk more about the maintenance and management of these colonies, but we're monitoring for diseases, and we put a lot of attention towards treatment of varroa mite. So what I want to do here is I want to give you just an example of how I score my colonies and exactly the reason why I do it. So what you're seeing here is 2 graphs. One is of a vigorous queen and one is of a failing queen, okay? So there's a lot of lines here, but the 2 I want you to pay attention to is this population line and this brood line, okay? These are all the other dynamics that's going on within the colony, which are important, but they're not relevant right now. So these colonies, the queen had set both these colonies up just masterfully in the fall, as you can see, because these colonies are coming out in spring at 25,000 bees within that nest. I'd mark both these nests as strong colonies coming out of the winter shed, okay? But one is a vigorous queen and the other is failing. For some reason, she's failed throughout the spring, and we need to be able to catch that. So what I do is I tip my colonies back right to the shed, and I do that initial assessment. So they both grade as strong. The second time I come around into April, after that nest has flipped out of that winter nest into that springtime nest, I do another assessment. And during that assessment, you'll notice that the vigorous queen has progressed forward, right? I'm tipping that colony back. I'm seeing a developing nest that's expanding, moving forward. That failing queen, so you notice that brood line is flatlined. And I mean, that's all the potential she's got. She's staggered. And you notice that colony is it's not advancing as much. That's a very hard time to catch those failing queens in the spring, except for the next time that comes around. So this next time later in May, when I'm going to be taking a split off these colonies, I'm looking through, and this vigorous hive has expanded to the point where I'm actually harvesting bees off them, right? They're going to make me a lot of money. I want to promote everything around that nest. That failing hive is not giving me anything like that. And this is a point in time which we have to recognize, and we have to address the situation now. Because if we just leave this colony drift through the rest of summer into fall, we're going to spend money on them, we're going to spend time on them, and they're not going to make us any money, right? They're going to follow probably in the supersedure, if not outright failure. So this is the time when we have to target these failing colonies to make sure our apiary is all together and all productive and moving forward, right? So right about this time is when I take that colony and I could either requeen her, but what I typically do is I kill off that queen, I take that failed unit, and I send it right back to the start and drop a queen cell in there just to rejuvenate that nest, just to provide that youth back in that nest. So I, in a sense, salvage that unit. I remove her from the operation, replace it with a viable hive, and it just continue rejuvenation like that is what keeps a colony, or keeps an apiary strong and moving forward. If I could have recognized that failure on that second assessment, drop a queen in there, all my troubles would have been taken care of. But a lot of time you miss them that second assessment, but you catch them on that third. So as we're going through calling the equipment out, we disease check, we're cleaning up all these boxes, we're scraping frames. This is typically, I have a staff that helps me with this springtime work. So if it's raining outside, we can't do any work. they're in here, they're cleaning up the frames, they're scraping, they're sorting into 3 different piles. And the reason why I do that is because I want to know how many empty frames I have. I want to know how many pollen plugged frames I have, and I want to know how many honey frames I have. And this just helps me sort out the equipment, which I'm then going to put into making up more hives, more split equipment. So what we do is we take that, all the equipment that's been cleaned up, and after it passes the inspection for disease, we sort them back into brood boxes. And we do it very specifically, and you're going to see exactly why in a little bit. But on the 2 outside frames, on every one of these boxes, we put 2 foundations. And then we put 2 honeys, and then 4 empty frames in the center, okay? And that's built very specifically. So back to the graph here. We had the hive set out mid-March. This is a point of time, is what I call the turnover, the spring turnover. So these hives, you know, they're drifting through winter, they're feeling kind of static, they're getting older and older and older until I set them out. And you notice right at that point in time when you set them out in the spring, those bees age terribly. It's like they lose their winter longevity and they regain that summer longevity bee. So they switch from winter bees to summer type bees. So they have 3.5 weeks to live. And you'll notice at that exact time, that brood is starting to escalate. These bees, these winter bees, are providing all the resources within themselves, and they're handing it over to that next generation. They're giving that winter nest into that next generation. And as they do that, they lose their longevity. So they have to be, this is a very critical time, probably one of the most critical times of the year for a honeybee nest, is that I call it this, the turnover, that flip from the winter nest, the old winter bees, into those young springtime bees. So that's why I'm feeding. That's why I'm providing all those conditions needed to be able to promote an absolute brilliant nest. We have to maintain that momentum throughout the spring, throughout all these variable conditions. We have to target our management to make sure that this brood line continues moving upwards before these bees die right off, right? So they got to switch themselves out. And then once they switch that nest out, then they proceed into that next step of the transition. They move into expansion mode, okay? So right at this time, right during that expansion mode, this is where we are right now. We're beginning of May, so that we set them outside. The bees are brooded up 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later. That brood's emerged, and we're into May. They're moving into that expansion mode. This is when we do that second assessment. We come through and we're just assessing to see how that nest is flipped over. And this is how we determine true vigor of that queen. So we go around and we tip the colonies back, right? Counting frames again. And we assess that, we assess the frame score at this time to the previous one that we did just coming out of the shed. And that just tells us how that hive's progressing. So that's that second assessment. So those strong colonies, now there's some of them, as you can see here, there's boxes of bees, right? These boxes, it can be very full. And, you know, 8 to 10 frames of bees, they have 4 or 5 frames of brood sporting inside, which will be emerging shortly. So we have to promote these colonies with space on top to be able to provide that expansion. So right now is when we're targeting these strong colonies. And right now is when we, you know, promote everything they need to build to continue that forward momentum. Anything that grades less than a strong, that's, you know, it's a medium. Just because it's a smaller type colony doesn't mean it's poor. It just means they're small. There's a lot of reasons why we have smaller colonies. So those ones we'll go through in a little bit later. We'll go down into those ones, assess those queens, assess the nest, see what's going on. The good ones, you know, typically we have to skim a frame of brood off. Maybe there's a smaller one that needs a bit of a boost. We'll drop a frame of brood in there. Or maybe it's a failing queen. We'll pinch her off, throw that hive right at the beginning, drop a queen cell in there to rejuvenate that nest through as a nuke. So I manage my colonies in the spring under kind of a philosophy of managing my nests tight. You know, managing the space from the colonies. And one of the reasons why I do that is because, as most of you probably appreciate over there, is hives thrive in smaller spaces. They seem to be able to manage all those dynamics, those cluster dynamics, better in a small space, as you know, these cold weather patterns come through, or rain or whatever. So I keep my hives tight, keep them tight. Throughout that winter, spring flip, they're tight in their box. They're maintaining that nest in that single box, or if they're nukes, I keep them tight in those nukes. But as you can appreciate, you get those big colonies at 8 to 10 frames of bees and 4 to 5 frames of brood inside. They're close to, you know, outgrowing that space. So we have to be extremely careful not to, you know, keep them too tight at times when they're expanding and growing. So right about that time, we give them space to be able to provide them with that expansion. But we have to be like, I don't know how many of you guys watch my videos, but you'll notice that in the spring, I'm always bitching and complaining about the weather, and as things are supposed to be progressing and proceeding, the weather's not cooperating and these bees are growing and I got to add space, but I don't want to add space, because if I add space to these colonies too soon through crap weather, you know, I remove that lid, I move it up, I give them all that extra headspace, all that extra house to look after. And if they can't maintain their cluster dynamics because of that, because of the cold weather, disease gets the opportunity to influence itself, and they can come down with disease. We can't allow disease to be able to take any type of foothold, and disease expresses itself through stress. So we have to make sure that as we manage our hives through all this transition and manage it through all these variable conditions, that we provide them with the conditions that relieve them of any type of stress, right? So some years I'll go out and slap on seconds, and all of a sudden, I remember one year in particular, we had a snowstorm surprise us, and we had like a week of snow. And these hives, I give them all that space, and all of a sudden it's cold and snow. They snapped their cluster back on me, influenced a little bit of stress. And for the next 3 weeks, I had chalkbird being kicked out of the front entrance just because they weren't able to maintain those dynamics, which they're maintaining, and the weather just kind of kicked them in the gut a little bit. So that's my philosophy around that. And when I'm adding this, so, you know, the weather is cooperating, these hives are proceeding, we're going around, we're adding the seconds. Okay, so those seconds we're putting on are those split boxes, which we had previously set up from all that dead out equipment and cleaned up. And as you remember, we set those boxes up very specifically with 2 foundation on either side, and we gave them a frame of honey on either side, a little bit of food, right? And then 4 frames of empty comb right in the center. So what we're doing is we're taking that single box, we're taking that wintered colony, and we're manipulating it to now take a split off that colony. We're wanting to harvest that strength. And the way I have it set up here is I'm telling that queen exactly the size of split I want to be able to take off this colony. 4 frames of empty comb in the center. I want to take 3 to 4 frames of brood out of this colony as a split later on in May. So I take advantage of their natural act of stovepiping. I'm sure you're all familiar with stovepiping. So you have a brood box busting full of brood and bees. You put a box up on top, they move directly straight up, and that queen's going to go straight up in the center and lay those frames of brood. So I'm telling her exactly what I want her to do. Got a little bit of honey in there, you know, to boot. And then these frames of foundation are really important. And the reason why I have them there is just to buy me time, just to help manage some of the workload and the conditions that fall upon me throughout the spring. So as we're working through the split, which comes in about 3 weeks from now, I'll start the split, and these foundation frames basically will be empty because they're not big enough. There'll be 3 or 4 frames of brood in here. Nice little colony I'm splitting off. Looks just beautiful. As my split carries on, and as these hives grow, and as weather puts me behind, and because I have too many hives, I'm not caught up with my work, all of a sudden I have this influence of bees. All of a sudden they appear in there, all these young bees, and I have this dandelion that flows, and all of a sudden I have this nectar flowing into my colonies, and I can't keep up to them. They just explode. So what these frames do is just provides them a space to put all that energy. So that near the end of my split, I'm looking at a box full of bees. I'm looking at frames of foundation totally drawn out, filled up with dandelion honey, and nobody swarmed on me. So it's an absolute beautiful thing. So after we put that second box onto those big colonies, is right about this time, beginning of May, we give them about 3 weeks, three and a half, 4 weeks or whatever, or 3 weeks. Right middle of May, just before June, right here is when we're taking our split. This represents my swarm period. I call this point of time my reason why I beekeep. It's our job description is colony management, swarm control. If you can control the swarms, you're going to make these big crops of honey. You got to keep them at home. So this is the point of time which we target to be able to manage our swarming. And right in the middle, end of May, just before June, depending on the weather, right here is when we take that split off. So this is the busiest time of year. Everything focuses around this point of time. This is when we set our hives up for the spring or for the summer flow. This is when, if we can set our hives up properly, we can capture that summer crop, and these hives are going to be conditioned going into fall. Everything revolves around this workload at this point of time. And it is one of the most stressful point of time for me as a beekeeper. You know, you look at honey crop, you look at fall preparation, you look at all the spring work, the split. When we set these colonies up, this is the most stressful point of time. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out how to manage this workload, the workload of managing the split, because I used to go through every colony, you know, as I was building up my operations from, you know, 4 hives, 50 hives, 100 hives, 200 hives, before I'm 400, 500 hives, and I'm trying to go through managing this workload, trying to take this split, looking for the queen, making off the split. And I remember very distinctly a point of time which was the genesis of the transformation of managing my workload. I'm going through my hives, taking off splits, and I searching for that bloody queen. I couldn't find that queen. I went through all 20 frames, couldn't find that queen. Very frustrated, went back through the colony, found her, made the split, you know, carried on to the next colony. Sure enough, that next colony, I could not find that queen. 20 frames later, you know, finally found her, made that split, you know, carried on. And I'm thinking to myself this entire time, searching through those frames, is like, this workload it's not, I got to figure something out. I had 200 queens in my queen bank back at the honey yard. I had my dad picking up another 200 queens I'd bee made because I'm anticipating this huge splits ahead of me. I have 3 to 4 days of weather starting the next day, which is going to completely stagger my workload. I wasn't getting my work done, and these hives are busting at the seams. They're going to swarm if I can't get at them, right? What am I supposed to do? I can't get this work done. I can't bring people in to help me with this because I won't let anybody touch my brood nest. So what I did is after I finished that yard, I remember very distinctly on my way to the next one it was that evening, and I wanted to poke through another colony just to try to get ahead. I texted him. I said, how are you managing this workload? He had 1,200 hives or whatever. He said, you're spending too much time finding the queen. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, no shit, Sherlock. This is the reason why I'm asking a little bit of feedback from you, right? Just help me out. How do you manage this workload? So I went to that next yard trying to get you know, a little bit more work done, dropped down into that next colony. Sure enough, couldn't find that damn queen. Close it up. Driving home out of frustration, I texted him again, no, seriously, how are you managing this workload? And he texted back right away. He said, quit finding the queen. And quit finding the queen. I mean, what are you talking? I had no idea what he was talking about. So that evening, you know, I went back home and I was standing in the shower, and the shower is where I do all my thinking. So I'm standing in the hot water. I'm trying to think, what is he talking about? Not trying to find the queen. It didn't make any sense. And finally it dawned on me. He said, I knew exactly what he was talking about. We have to be able to manage our hives in ways where we remove ourselves from all that work, that unnecessary work. There's no reason why I need to go find that queen, none whatsoever. So I have to be able to employ methods and strategies to be able to manage this workload, to be able to keep on schedule, get all this work done, and then move forward. So I adopted a split management plan, which has been kind of tailored out through the seasons, and this is nothing new. A lot of beekeepers employ much similar practices as this, and I'll just kind of sort you through. So what I'm doing is, as you can see, there's 2 boxes of bees, and we want to split that off into, I want to manage the space down here, and I want to take that surplus strength away. So what I do is I remove that top box, put it up on top here. I then go down to that single box in the bottom, and I count out 4 frames of brood. 4 frames of capped brood. That's my magic number. That's the size I want that colony to be able to, alleviate all types of swarming throughout the summer period and get them into the fall. I count out 4. If there's 5, I throw a frame up there. If there's only 3, I sift 1 back down to the bottom. So I've determined my mother colony strength. I put this tub on top, and that's basically all that is a funnel. There's no bottom to it. It's basically just a funnel that fits over a colony. I then take every one of these frames in the top box, shake it down into the bottom box, and then I put those empty frames to the side. So once all those frames are shook down to the bottom, that queen and every one of those bees is in the bottom box. I know for damn certain that queen's down there. I then take that empty box, the brood. Well, first I put that excluder on. So that excluder goes over that single. I then take that box back on top. So now the bees gravitate through that excluder up to the top box to cover that brood again. And that queen, I know, is in the bottom. And this way I can go through the apiary, crack the boxes, count the frames, shake the bees. It takes me like 4 to 5 minutes. And I can keep a schedule, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, split, have a bit of coffee or whatever. This also allows me to bring employees in to help me with the workload. It doesn't take a genius to shake a frame of bees down in the bottom box. I go through like a surgeon. I do my little bit of work. I sift out the frames, but then guys follow me behind. They shake the bees. I don't need to shake bees. So I help hurry up the process doing that. It just helps me with my workload. So then when the bees gravitate back over top, the excluder, over top of those brood frames, what I do then is I come through, I slap down a bunch of pallets, and I use an easy loader. So I strip this top box off onto that pallet, and I take my splits away, easy breezy, just like that. So then what I do, and this is a very important part of my overall management strategy, is I take these excluders off, and then I put a honey box on top. So I allow that queen to manage 2 boxes again. Okay, so she has her brood box, she has her honey box, she's up and laying in that honey box, she has all the space she needs. Okay. Another thing we do, and we do this more often now, instead of just simply stripping that top box off as a split, we come through and we call this, all the bees up on top, we call them surplus bees, surplus strength. So we come through and we take all this surplus strength, take all the resource of brood, resource of bees, and we come through and make a shit ton of nukes. So here we set down pallets of, I manage 6 frame nukes. We set them down, and here's a picture of Carrie harvesting some of that brood and harvesting the bees to make up a bunch of nukes. So you got a choice whether to, all the units you make up, we can queen them with mated queens, or, we can use queen cells. And I've kind of shifted my entire operation to a self-sustainable queen management operation. I don't buy imports anymore. I kick the imports. I'm not going to talk about this. It's a presentation maybe for another time, but I've completely switched off. We make our own queens, we have our own breeding program. So we make up these nukes now, drop our queen cell in, and send them out to the mating yards to properly mate. So now the split is done. That big part of the year is done. That queen, she has full reign over both boxes again. So, you know, like I was showing you, we built that colony into 2 boxes. We took a box of bees away and we give them an empty box again to build to work into. So she still has reign in both boxes. She's laying brood between both units. This hive, the strength is set up for the main flow. They're ready to go. This is the size I want them. And this is a little bit of downtime right now after that split, as those queens and the splits are mating. So, you know, this is basically the time of year when we start moving our springtime yards after the splits. We're moving out into our summer yards to anticipate the honey flow. These bees are feeding on clovers, and they're feeding on alfalfas. They have steady nourishment coming in. So there's a continual progression of this nest. Until canola hits. Canola is king. In our area, canola is a big crop, and it's a flowering crop, and it produces this beautiful white honey, and a lot of it. So right at this point of time, you notice on the graph here, you notice the swarm season. We're right at the end of it. So we're approaching July right now. And the split is done. We're going into the summer flow. We're at the end of June, going into July. At this point in time, you know, we have just passed the solstice. That magical time in a beehive is that it's the solstice where they kind of shift their mentality from that expansion mode, from that reproduction mode. They kind of shift to that summer honey collection, hoardy kind of spirit. You notice the brood line has flatlined. So that queen has, you know, achieved all of her potential. She's achieved everything that she can give, and she's flatlining that nest right into summer. And you're going to notice this huge population just explode because of all those dynamics, all that management we put into these colonies, managing that population. The summer flow hits and we just let the rains go and we let them go, and they explode into growth. Right at this point of time, when that inflow of canola nectar starts to flow, we turn that 2 hive configuration. We drop that queen back down in the single box, and we're managing the brood nest in 1 box from this point on. And so here's a picture of one of my guys shaking bees. The way we do it is exactly the same way we split our colonies, is we shake all the bees back down to the bottom box, because we want to take that queen from the top box. She's brooding up in that top box. She's brooding in that honey box. We want her back down to the bottom, and we could go find her and put her down, which is too much work. So what we do is we just shake the bees down. So we take our funnels and we take every single one of these frames with bees and we shake them all down to the bottom. The only difference is when we put that excluder in, we are putting this box of brood back on top of this nest. And right at this time, generally is when the school kids get out of school. So we have all these high school kids who will have these expensive phones and they want to make some money. So they come up to the farm and say, hey, you know, my parents won't pay for this phone. I need some money. I need a job. So, hey, you work for me. So I throw them some bee gloves and a bee jacket and I say, get out to those yards and you're going to shake bees for the next week and a half. So that helps me work with my workload. It doesn't, and one of the reasons why a lot of question around why I use these laundry tubs that have a hole cut out to use as a funnel. You know, what are you using those for? I used to use, you know, an empty shell box, which works, you know, whatever can keep those bees directed straight down into that bottom chamber. But I find these laundry tubs are kind of like a funnel, and, you know, school kids, they don't shake. I shake bees like this, all the bees get down there, but these school kids, they're shaking bees like this and there's bees going everywhere. So this just gives them a bigger target to hit to make sure that queen gets down to the bottom, because I could give a damn about the bees. That queen has to be in the bottom. So I tell them, I want every single one of those bees in that box, in the bottom, not in the grass, you know, not on your boots, not left in that box on the frames. I want them down on the bottom, and that's what they do for me. So it works very well. So we have all the bees down in the bottom box. We're working long hours because once that honey flow hits, there's nectar coming in and they plug up just like that. And if we're not Johnny in the spot, we end up like top box, that second box is plugged full of honey, and we're trying to shake frames of nectar, and there's nectar being shook out in heavy frames, and it's just, the bees are, it's just too much. So we try to anticipate the flow a little bit, get those bees down. That flow comes in, plugs that second box. We have thirds up on top to be able to catch that incoming flow. And once that queen's down in that bottom box, that third's on there, that apiary is set. So we are moving into that next stage, which is the honey flow. And you have to appreciate, I've been going since, you know, 15-hour days for sure, true work-hour days from middle March right through to this point in time, which is end of June, approaching July. So I'm tired. You know, there's a lot of work. And what I do is I identify this point in time as being a little bit of a break. And I go to the lake. This is my time to get away from the farm. Very important time for me. You know, I have a crew back at the honey farm ready to work for me. And I tell them, go around, you put 2 boxes on every single one of my colonies. I don't have to be there for that, you know. Go around, mow all my bee yards, do all that housekeeping. I don't want to be there for that. If it's raining, you're going to build frames, you're going to sort foundation. We are just kind of in that wait mode as the honey flows in from the fields and the boxes. We're waiting for those boxes to flow. So this is when I try to get away from that bloody farm, take a little bit of family time, and just kind of enjoy a little bit of life, you know, let everybody else do my work when I don't have to be there. It's very important as beekeepers, as we build and expand our operations, that we can identify points of time which we can get away from the farm and, you know, live life. Because if you're a workaholic like me, you know, you start making excuses to keep working, and before you know it, you can't get away from that farm. You can't get away from the work because you don't allow yourself to. So you have to be able to build your business in such a way to have the facility to bring people in to do your work, which will allow you to get away from that work. Otherwise, the whole thing implodes, right? We're doing this for family, and we got to make sure that we keep on target on that. So that's just a little note I wanted to mention. But when I get back, I'm ready to work again, and we start, you know, anticipating the honey flow. So these bees are bringing in nectar. We're stacking these boxes. After I tell my kids to put on 2 boxes per hive. So when I get back, I start, you know, staging the apiary to be able to collect this honey. So the first thing we have to consider is when we put that excluder back in, we have to allow those colonies 21 days to be able to allow that brood to emerge, because we don't want to be bringing brood into the honey house as we try to extract. So as that brood emerges, that second's they're gonna backfill. My capacity, my facility is set up that I can pull 500 hives in a week. We can pull 500, extract 500 hives in a week. So I have a 1,500 hive operation. That means I can tackle 500 hives over a 3-week period. And because of that, I stage my supering very specifically. So the first 500 hives I identify, I'm going to keep them really tight, because I'm going to be there right now to be able to take that honey off and give them fresh space. The hives that I can't get to for a week, I give them a 1 box of space on top. And out here, when that flow is coming in, right about this time, we're kind of measuring the flow as filling 1 box per week. So that flow is filling 1 box per week. I got to make sure that those hives have the space to be able to fill that box per week. Those hives at the end, typically I leave my smaller hives or the nukes or whatever, and some of the hives we can't get to, we provide them 2 boxes of extra headspace to just to be able to give them the space they need to be able to catch all that incoming nectar as it comes in, flows into the colony. So then we set the apiary up, and we're pulling honey. And as you can see, right here is my easy loader. And I have my guys come through, and they're lifting these boxes of honey, full boxes of honey. So we lift all the full boxes, we slap in these empties, and then we put in a skateboard, and we put these boxes up on top. And what we're doing is we're clearing the bees from these honey boxes down into the bottom. So the bees, they have the natural cycle within their colony. You know, as the processor bees, are receiving that payload of nectar coming in from the foragers at the front entrance. They're going up and they're storing the honey, and then they're coming back down. So you have to appreciate this nest is continually cycling. And what this escape board does is it provides an interruption of that cycle. So when those bees go down, there's little cones here. They'll go down through these little cones. For whatever reason, they can't figure their way back through those cones. So when they cycle their way down into the bottom boxes, they can't get up. So they just carry their work, their natural work, filling these empty boxes underneath. It's a very non-invasive way to be able to clear bees from the boxes. The bees, like we're in the yard, it takes us about 25 minutes to get these boards set, the empties put in the board set. The bees don't even know we're there. And it also relieves us from having to lift all these heavy boxes of honey. Some of these boxes are 80 pounds. That's a lot of weight in a box of honey. That's a lot on my back and on my workers' back. So we come back in about 3 days. We leave these boards in for about 3 days, and it gives enough time to provide that natural cycle and to kind of zap all those bees down to the bottom, into the bottom of the hive here. So all these boxes on top are now bee-free. So simply we come through with the Easy Loader and we just strip those boxes off the colonies and we put them onto the truck. Everything's on pallets. You notice everything's on pallets. So, you know, all the work, heavy work on the colonies is with the Easy Loader onto pallets. All that work is done with the forklift, pallets and forklifts. There's no lifting or anything. I drop all these bees or all these boxes of honey into my hot room. This hot room is my winter shed. It doubles as a winter shed. It's my hot room. I keep it at 30 degrees Celsius, so nice and hot. Just honey's, as we can all appreciate, it flows better when it's warm. So its floor heat, so radiant heat comes up, keeps everything nice and warm. And no matter how hard we try, no matter which way we clear bees from our boxes, we're always going to have those stragglers stuck in those boxes, bringing, you know, just a smattering of bees. So what I do is I keep my hot room dark, except for a window. And that window kind of is a magnet. It zaps the bees to that window. And I can draw all those extra bees from the boxes, which keeps my facility workers a lot happier. And then I come through with a little pail and I sweep the bees off the window, dump them into a box, drop a queen cell in there and make up another hive. So it's just, you know, continually building bees. We use a 60 frame cowan extractor, which is complemented by a Cooks and Beals wax separator. So I have this honey house running every day. Carrie manages a honey house, and typically I give her 2 to 3 school kids to help her run this equipment. It just depends how many guys show up for the day to work, but typically it's 2 to 3 running this place every day, and I can extract 275 to 350 boxes a day with this facility, depending on how heavy these boxes are coming in. So this workload, this all translates into roughly 18 to 22 drums we can pull out every day. I spend my time in the yards collecting the honey. I'll bring maybe 2 with me, 3 if we're overstaffed, and we just go through and we put in boards and we strip off the boxes. So we're typically starting this flow, or starting collection middle July, and it runs to September. This last few years, things seem to be ending a lot sooner than that. Some years it ends end of July, some years end in the middle of July. Seems like it's getting hotter and drier, and just, you know, our honey season is tightening up on us. So it really whips our work schedule to make sure we get these boxes flipped to be able to get all the flow. So yeah, so all this kind of, you know, represents 250,000 pounds. This year we produced 275,000 pounds of honey, or about 450 some odd drums. So on that last round, as we're stripping off the honey boxes, after there's no more flow coming back in, we're basically pushing those bees down into that bottom box. We're using escapes to do that. And we take all those last remaining bees and they're going down into single boxes. And this is when we start preparing the colonies for winter. And you have to appreciate that queen, because we confined her earlier in summer to that bottom box, she's maintaining that nest full of brood. We're taking these boxes off and I'm peeking down here and she's almost wall-to-wall brood in the bottom. So when you manage your hives as a double unit, that queen sets herself up in a nice oval pattern. They have brood or pollen on the side, top dress themselves with honey, nice and natural. What we do is we put that excluder in, so we're forcing her down in the bottom box, and what we're doing is we're forcing that oval out sideways. So the nests are practically the same, except she has very little space to put that extra pollen, a lot less, hardly any honey is allowed in the bottom. We force all that up into that second box, which allows us to take it all away and harvest it as our crop. Well, two reasons why I do that is because honey is money. So, more honey we produce, the more we can sell. But the second reason is that abundance of canola is a blessing, but at the same time, it's a bloody curse. Canola honey can set itself up extremely hard. And in dry conditions like across the prairies here, you will get some honey stored away at 14.5, 15%. And it makes terrible winter food because the bees literally can't access it as their sugar source as they try to get through winter. It just dries right up. We'll have colonies actually starve on a slab of canola honey. So what we want to do is promote our management, or what we do anyways, is promote it so we can extract all that summertime canola honey so there's none of it down into that brood nest, so we don't have to deal with that. And it provides the opportunity then to encourage the nest to bring in more of that natural fall time honey, which it provides good winter feed. You'll notice these nukes. I'm not going to talk a lot about my nuke configuration here because I'm out of time, but it's even exaggerated more where we build these little nests and we slap our excluders up on top. And it's shared space up on top. These nests have absolutely no space for anything else but brood and a little bit of pollen. So when we're pulling off these boxes of honey in the fall, we have to make sure that they don't go into instant starvation mode. It's a point in time which a lot of beekeepers make a mistake. They can starve just like that. So we got to make sure that either they have some honey down there if they're a little bit smaller, or we have to make sure that we feed them to provide a little bit of nourishment to keep them going. And at this point in time, because we're managing in that single box and there's so many bees down in that single that we have to make sure to feed them, to keep them going, to keep that momentum moving forward, but we can't overfeed them to where those bees, plug that nest right out with feed where they have no space to be able to rear that very important winter nest. And we do that by feeding with little pails. So we'll give them half a gallon or a gallon of feed just to keep them going, or we'll provide them a little bit open feed where I don't have neighbors around. Just kind of flash the syrup at them, just mimic a little bit of that natural incoming forage, and just to keep them going. At that time, we're stripping off those honey boxes. We're also feeding supplement, and I'm a big believer in supplemental feeding just to complement that natural pollen that's out in the environment, just to give them all those basics that they need to be able to develop a very well-defined, healthy brood nest. At this time, we're also focusing on monitoring and mite treatments. So as I'm running a little bit long on my talk here, I'll just quickly go through the last little bit here. You'll notice, and this is a very important time for setting up these colonies for winter, and this is the point in time in which we are just finishing. So September, you'll notice that the brood line is naturally decreasing. You're also going to notice that this huge population is now spent as these bees naturally die off as fall approaches. So as that brood line decreases, this is our winter nest. This line right here, very important. She's slowing down her laying. That nest is setting those bees up as the bees to endure that length of time over winter. As she's decreasing that brood nest, this is where we as a beekeeper take advantage of all that opportunity of excess space now. So as September approaches, this nest is decreasing. This is when we start bulk feeding. So we don't hold back. We give them absolutely everything they can take as this brood nest naturally decreases, we fill up with syrup. In a sense, we are in a way shutting that nest down because we want her to go broodless to be able to manage all these terrible winter conditions just about ahead of her. So we do that by using pails, 2.5 gallon pails. We'll slap up on top, give them a couple of those pails, or we'll go through and open feed just to bulk them right up. We go through after we're done the main glut of bulk feeding, and I'll weigh these colonies. So end of September, after the main of the feeding is done, just to be able to sort out how much more feed I got to give them or not, I go through my apiary and I just randomly select hives and just randomly weigh. And this just tells me in a yard basis if I need to provide more feed or if they're fed up to weight. So my target is I want these colonies this time of year to be going into winter at 90 pounds. I might get a little carried with myself and I might feed them up to 100, but that generally will get them through winter. If I have 5 months of winter, I generally figure these hives to consume 10 pounds of feed per month. So 5 months, and they need 50 pounds of feed in there, and I give them some extra to boot for spring. At this time, as that brood is going queenless, as that nest is going queenless, we target them with an oxalic acid treatment. And this has been a very effective tool of managing mites on our farm, just taking advantage of that natural mite exposure as that brood, all that brood emerges and those mites can't hide anymore. So when we go to the yards after hives are set up, this is what we're just about to do in a couple of weeks. We pick the yards up, put them onto the truck, and we try to do it before it snows, because when it snows, it just kind of duplicates our work and makes everything so much harder. We're cracking the bees off frozen ground and we're putting them on the truck and everything's wet and slippery, and so we try to get this done before the snow starts to fall. And I bring them into my winter shed, which was my hot room, converted now into my winter shed, stack them 6 high in rows, get all 1,500 in there. And I close the door and I turn the lights out. And that is basically a snapshot of my year, of my management. Thank you.